Chapter 2, Mishnah 5. The following two Mishnahs focus on the rule of chibur, connection. When a source of tumah touches something that can become tameh, the entire item becomes tameh, even the part of it that the tumah did not touch. The item is treated as a single unit, so that when part of it becomes tameh, all of it becomes tameh. In order for two parts of a single item to be treated as one in regard to tumah, they must be connected to each other. On the simplest level, this means that they must be physically connected. However, being physically connected is not enough. There are certain physical connections that the Torah considers insignificant. In such cases, even though the two parts are physically connected, they are not considered legally connected, and the tumah of each part must therefore be judged independently. Our Mishnah teaches that even two parts of a single item of food are sometimes viewed as separate objects in regard to tumah, even though they are still attached. We now turn to the words of the Mishnah. If someone cuts up food such as gourds, onions, and meat in order to cook it in a pot, the law is that even though he did not complete the cut and the parts are still connected, it is not considered a connection, and each part must be viewed as a separate piece of food in regard to tumah. Since the person knows that when he cooks the food, the connection will break apart, it is clear that when he left the pieces connected, it was not because he was interested in maintaining the connection between them, but if he cut up the food in order to preserve it in wine or vinegar, or to boil it for a short time, or to simply place it on the table and serve it as is, it is considered a connection. None of these actions will cause the connection to break apart. Thus, we assume that the reason he did not cut through the food completely before preserving it or undercooking it is that he wanted the pieces to remain attached, therefore considered connected. If he later began to separate one of the pieces from the rest of the food, the piece of food he began separating is not considered connected to the rest of the food, but the other pieces are still considered connected. The Mishnah teaches a different law for walnuts and onions that were tied together. Walnuts that were tied together on a string, or onions that were braided together in a bunch, are considered connected to one another. If he began to separate them in the case of walnuts, i.e. he began separating the nuts from the string, or to peel them in the case of onions, i.e. he began unbraiding the onions from the bunch into which they had been tied, it is not a connection, i.e. as soon as he begins removing the first walnut or the first onion, all the walnuts or onions on the string are no longer considered connected to one another. This is because he clearly demonstrated that he intends to separate all of them. As we learned in the previous Mishnah, the shells of food have the status of a shomer of the food. The Mishnah now teaches what happens when the shells are broken. The shells of walnuts and almonds are considered connected to the nuts until they are crushed. Even if the shells get cracked, they maintain their status as a shomer, as long as they remain physically attached to the meat of the nuts. However, once the shell is crushed into many small pieces, it is no longer considered a shomer.